And we have a very nice possibility to make knowledge exchange between the participants on this, and it will be presented mostly by Michael Burnard, who is working at the University of Primorska, but originally he's coming from the States, from Oregon. Michael lives now in Koper in Slovenia and works for the University of Primorska as a researcher, and is developing courses for the Sustainable Field Environment Master's Degree program. He's also working as a researcher and deputy director. So please, Mike, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, everyone. I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to the STSMs, what they are, and how you might get involved in them, and then I'm going to let the people who actually participate in the STMs take over the bulk of this session, because that's where the story really is. So a few things. Our STSMs were, I think, quite successful. We had planned on having 4. So far we've had 4.5. One is currently underway in New Zealand right now. So there were 5 STSMs granted, 8 countries were involved, 3 of them were inclusiveness countries, which is a good target. 4 people that undertook these short-term scientific missions were early career researchers, which means we're really helping young researchers get involved to not only in the project, but helping their career and getting involved in a larger network related to our topic. 4 of those STSMs are complete, and we'll hear about those today. One of them is currently underway in New Zealand. I emailed Edeltraud this morning, and she sounds like she's having a good time down there. It was mostly to remind her that she needs to get her reporting done because the grant period is coming to an end, but also to check in and say we missed her. So we have some presentations today. 4 of them, as I said, are from the participants, but also one from the host, so we get the host perspective on what it's like to be involved in one of these short-term scientific missions. So just a little bit about short-term scientific missions. These are short visits to a different location within the COST network or even possibly outside of it. It's an opportunity to work with a particular researcher who has some special knowledge that you would like to work with, to work at a specific location where perhaps there's some equipment or a certain research activity going on there that you want to be involved with. They typically last 5 to 90 days. I would say mostly we're looking in the, say, 20 to 30 day range, or maybe a little bit less, or maybe a little bit more, but there's a lot of options there. Early career researchers have the potential to stay for longer. There is a maximum fixed grant for these, though, so it's not just a, go stay in a big mansion in a nice sunny place. But it's a really good opportunity. So it's a really great opportunity to extend your own work, to meet people, to build a network. And it's also one of the best ways to contribute to the goals of the COST action, because there's really some hard work that's being done and some really solid results that come from these. I have the opportunity to read the reports from these, and it's really fascinating and really interesting to see what people are doing and find out how that's going to contribute to the COST action. So how to get involved? There are a couple ways. Watch the website and our social media channels for announcements for our calls. Once you see one of those calls, you can find out, you can figure out a project that you might be able to be involved with, and then make arrangements with a host. Once you have all that together, you can send in your application. There's detailed instructions for all of that when the call goes out. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And also consider participating as a host. I know Bartosz is going to talk a bit more about that coming up, and some ways to get your name out there as a potential host for these short-term scientific missions, so I'll leave it there. And with that, I would like to bring on the first presenter, which is Herman. He is an assistant professor at Warsaw University of Life Sciences, and here you are. He's going to tell us about his short-term scientific mission to Faro.
Hi, my name is Krzysztof Herman. I'm a landscape architect from Warsaw University of Life Sciences, and once we get the slides uploaded, we started. So my STSM was in Faro with Thomas, who's sitting here, and it was 30 days. I really enjoyed it. It was good work and pleasure balance, I would say. The title of the mission was Traces of Upcycling and Low Budget Design in the Public Space of Faro. And since I'm a landscape architect, I focused on the green spaces, actually on 3 parts I'll show you in a second. And I know that the beginning of the work in the Cost Restore was a lot about defining words and defining aspects of restorative sustainability. So the words that I was looking for were upcycling and low budget. Low budget meaning thriftiness, meaning being smart about saving and not spending too much, not using too much resources. And upcycling in the meaning of something more meaningful than recycling. So if you take sustainability and recycling, that's similar, but on a different language level, let's say, in industrial design. But then upcycling is redefining the same elements, the same materials, the same space, but adding more value in the process and using as less resource as possible. The goals of the STSM were to look at the traces of upcycling and low budget design in the public space of Faro and explore notions of frugality and thriftiness as a strategy for sustainability in urban environments. The goal was to see how green spaces can become successful, well used, appreciated by the users, despite very limited investment and restricted amount of resources. I think for some reason the text is not being shown in the full way. The purpose was first to do a literature review, characterize upcycling and low budget design as a strategy for restorative sustainability, document and systematize traces of upcycling and low budget design in the public space and the green space of Faro, and analyze those findings and look at the state of restorative sustainability in regards to those 2 elements. So the great part of STSM is looking at the surrounding landscape of the place where you're at, and Thomas was great at showing different projects. One of them was in Faro on the beach, the restoration project for the sand dunes. And when you think about low cost projects and projects that also take the philosophy of repairing, not this was an interesting space to look at and see how people themselves were engaged in building those platforms that were used almost as streets in this particular place. People were biking on it and walking to their homes on it and repairing it themselves. Very simple element, but very meaningful for this restorative process in this landscape. So those were, let's say, low budget interventions or landscapes. On the other hand, we looked at very high budget landscapes of golf courses. When I was there in October, there was no rain for about 5 or 6 months in Faro. And meanwhile, the places where the rich expats live were all green and beautifully landscaped with a lot of money and water put into it. Those were very, very high budget landscapes. Not necessarily very sustainable, especially with the changes of climate that are happening in the south of Portugal. And I looked. I took 3 parks as my case studies. All of them are in the area of Faro. All of them were supposed to be urban parks. And they're different size, but all of them were built after the year 2004. The oldest one was built in 2004 for the Euro Cup the big football event that took place in Portugal. So this one is so-called leisure park, or Parque de Lazer. It's very central. It's very simple. It's in a spot where there was supposed to be a gas station there, but they didn't build the gas station and decided to kind of give this space to local activists and program this space as just a little bit of grass and a strip of concrete, and then several benches and few elements like playground equipment. Very simple space, but very well rooted in the urban fabric of the city. Forum Algarve, which is the biggest mall in the city, is right on the other side of the street. So there's a lot of potential, there's a lot of users, and there's a lot of programming in this space, even though the initial cost of this place was very, very, very low. This is the biggest of the parks. It's surrounding the new football stadium that was built for the Euro Cup, and it's not used by anybody. I've been there many, many times. It's about 10 kilometers or 8 kilometers from the center of the city. There's nobody there ever. It surrounds the park. It's a huge space. It was a lot of money put into it. And when it comes to success rate, right away it showed that none of the elements of the park are used. They're all deteriorating and in a bad conditions. And the third one was Parque de Ribeirinho, which is a new, very kind of designer park with a lot of non-permeable surfaces. And the best thing about it is the view, and cost about €3.5 million to make. So I looked at the case studies of those three places, and also had some questionnaires, surveys made by experts and the local residents, looking at what they think when it comes to, let's say, how well those places serve the community. This was based on the World Health Organization questionnaire for urban parks. The literature review that we're coming to the results showed that low budget strategies are purposeful a lot of times in landscape architecture and in urban planning. There's methods like Light, Cheap and Quick, LCQ, that is developed by Project for Public Spaces. It leads to relatively inexpensive alterations to a public space that creates multifunctional sociable places. And I also looked at the elements of upcycling as a keyword that could change the way we think about investments and especially in public space and in green areas. This is some statistics about from the questionnaires, and the smallest, the Parc de Lazer, the cheapest park, has in all the statistics looked as the most successful. People, both locals and the professionals, think it's the best one when it comes to success rate. And the Parc des Citades, the urban park, the one around the stadium, is graded very, very low. So the one that costs the most is definitely the success rate is the lowest. I mean, I could talk about the numbers much more. This is just a general result, and this Parc des Citades could be shown as an example of the LCQ, the Light, Cheap and Quick, the way of creating public and green space as a very simple and inexpensive place that is programmed more than it's arranged with high cost elements. It's an effortless green space that attracts large groups and individual users. I made a lot of observations there. I was there every second, every third day, looking at how people use it, and it was really, really nice to see a lot of people using a place that is so simple and so effortless. So it's a great spot, even though there's very little money put into this place, and the initial investment was about maybe €50,000 or something like that to change this place from the planned gas station to a public park. And there is more things happening. People are planting trees. So in this spot, so there is a lot of bottom-up movement and grassroots movement to change this place, to add elements to it. So it's it's a work of constant public participation, and I think this public participation and the way it was arranged with locals involved in the in creation of the space is very sustainable, very kind of restorative too, and the term upcycling of space that I'm working on in the paper that is following the research, I think fits very well with this one particular project. Okay, so this is.
Thank you very much. We'll move right along to our next presenter, which is Madalina Sbarcea from Romania. Madalina specializes in architecture and currently works as a researcher at the Danube Delta National Institute for Research and Development and is a PhD student at Minciu University of Architecture and Urbanism in Bucharest. Bear with me 1 second. Oh, you just have
I have one. Oh, I just have to turn it on.
I might have to come to your presentation.
I think
It should be okay now. Hi everyone, let me just start by saying that I'm really happy to be here today in this beautiful city and in such great company. As Michael said, I'm an architect. I work as a junior researcher at Danube Delta National Institute in Romania, which is a research institute that is focused on environmental protection and sustainable development of communities in the Danube Delta Biosphere Reserve, which is, like many other natural protected areas, a place of eternal conflict between the community's needs for development and the need to protect the natural resources. My STSM was carried out in Portugal, in the same place as Chris went. My host was Professor Panagopoulos. In my STSM, which is named a biophilic mindset for restorative buildings, I wanted to investigate the concept of biophilia, the way to translate the connection with nature into biophilic design and influencing the way that we design our environment. What is the connection between this biophilic knowledge and the paradigm shift towards a restorative sustainability for the built environment? How is this biophilic design evidence linked with current practices that promote and encourage sustainable buildings, such as certification standards for sustainability or recognized best practices? And this way, finding some of the challenges and opportunities for making this transition from doing less bad to doing more good through biophilic design strategies. Well, the activities carried out during my time there, which was about 1 month, was a literature review on the restorative functions of the built environment designed based on biophilic principles, and trying to understand how the sustainability is defined by some of these important influencers of the built environment, such as the certification standard that we mentioned and best practices examples. And of course, to get to know a bit the local context and to actually engage with nature in the place of my visits through different field trips organized by the host. As a spatial contest, the STSM was carried out in Faro, which is in the southern region of Portugal, in Algarve. And the organized field trips were to almost all of the settlements along the coast, the southern coast of Portugal, and we even crossed the border a little bit in Spain. I will just show some of the pictures. This is actually the same place that Chris just showed before. It is a really beautifully landscaped and carefully landscaped area with the golf courses. It is true that it is a bit exclusive in terms of target groups for tourists. This is a wooden walkway between Quinta do Lago, the golf course, and the beach, passing across the Ria Formosa, which is a wetland of international importance, a protected natural area. I like the way that the wooden pathway is separated for pedestrian and for bicycle traffic, and they also had electrical vehicles to the beach, which was also very interesting to see. Some contrasting ways of development policies of settlements in Algarve, depending, of course, of the type of tourists that they were targeting. We can see here in Albufeira really intensive development, occupying almost every square inch of land. Low-budget tourism mainly, and a rather nice development in Pedras del Rey, which is more at a human scale, with small-scale units, accommodation, blended nicely with the surroundings. We also got to see a few places of urban regeneration. In Portimao, the picture on top shows former fish canning site. In Portugal, after they have become a member of the European Union, they had to comply, of course, with the regulation related to protection of the environment, and many of the fish canning factories simply could not do that, so the sites just closed, and a lot of places were in need of regeneration. And this is one example that worked really well for them. It's now turned into a touristic accommodation resort. On the left bottom we have in Oliao, which is again a fisherman village that still keeps most of its fisherman village characteristics. On the site of a former fish canning factory, there is now an auditorium, and what I really liked, and I've seen in many of these kind of projects, developments, is that they have maintained an element that is basically the memory of the place. In this case is the chimney, and in many places they have kept the original chimney just to remember of what was there before. And in Praia de Barril, another industrial site that is now developed and working really well in restaurant, public service, retail area. Now, the literature review. This is basically what my brain was looking like after 2 weeks or something like that. I just put in here some of the concepts that were completely new to me. I had never heard of salutogenesis before, which is basically the generation of health and focusing mostly of what keeps us healthy.
I think if you take a step backward, it will help if your mic is so close to the speaker.
Okay. Is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of terms of concepts that were really interesting to get into, truly learning experience. So basically biophilia is all about our deep ingrained connection with nature, with natural systems and processes. And biophilic design is translating these the benefits that we derive from those from that connection into our designing of projects for the built environment. Researchers are currently advocating for transition from former reductionist and mechanistic worldview to an ecological and whole systems worldview, where we acknowledge that everything is connected in a system of living organisms. And just like Martin showed before in the ego, eco, seva figure, we have to acknowledge that we are part of the ecosystems and not separated from them, and that a restorative environment for ourselves is obviously a restorative environment for nature also. As a conclusion, I would like to say that biophilia is indeed a core value for whole systems regeneration.
And translating benefits of biophilia, there is an overwhelming evidence related to the benefits that we have. Children performing better in schools, patients recovering faster and with less medication in the hospitals, a lot more productivity at the workplace. So it is quite obvious that biophilic design elements support this regenerative function of the built environment towards health and well-being of the occupants of a building. And it was really nice to notice biophilic design elements in this building, as Martin noticed also. And biophilic design is only one dimension of a whole system design approach. Of course, some challenges that can turn into opportunities were identified, such as many times there might be some sort of economic impediment in convincing a client or a developer to apply certain biophilic elements or biophilic design strategies. But fortunately, there are some studies that quantify, mostly in the USA, but it would be better to have some of those developed in Europe, about how much companies save by providing better environments for the people that are working there. Less absenteeism, more productivity, and so on, which is quantifiable. And of course, there are developing frameworks and resources for biophilic design, like the biophilic design patterns that were carefully and very detailed laid out by Therapy in Bright Green, where we have these elements that we can take and try to integrate in our designs, like the nature of space, providing direct connection, visual or otherwise, with natural elements, but also indirect connections. Also, this is actually what Restore is doing. We just seen from Emanuele and Lisanne presentation with new tools and methods for integrating this sort of initiatives. Of course, aside from the gaining a better understanding of concepts and learning new concepts and frameworks for restorative design, the benefits of attending an STSM are quite obvious in gaining some mentored experience. Early career researchers like myself get to be guided in our activities by established researchers. And there's a lot of networking with peers in an international way. My office colleagues were from Portugal, Greece, Italy, Iran, Brazil, Mexico, so it was a really international workplace. Of course, new settings always bring new perspectives and inspirations along. And as next steps, we are preparing a collaborative paper based on this STSM. It was also nice that my mission overlapped with Chris's for 1 week, and we got to meet each other and to know each other and to exchange ideas, which set the basis for future collaboration. And I'm really hoping and will follow closely all Restore activities to get further involved. So thank you very much for your attention. And I will leave you with a picture of a beautiful sunset in Faro. This is from a surfing lesson. And, for the local organizer, Köszönöm szépen, is it okay? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite our next speaker, who's a host of the 2 previous STSMs we heard about, Professor Thomas Panagopoulos. He is the department head of landscape architecture, master's degree at the University of Algarve in Portugal and Faro, and at the doctoral program for innovation and land management. He was founding member of vice president of the Center for Spatial Research and Organizations at the University of Algarve, and his main research fields are landscape reclamation, landscape architecture, and sustainable development. Thank you.
You will use that?
Thank you. As it was said, I'm a landscape architect. I'm not architect, so my perspective is mostly about landscape or city landscape. And short-term missions are not a student to come to a professor, it's a colleague to come to another colleague and exchange ideas, see different case studies, and reach knowledge, both of them, not only one that is coming. And maybe in some other cases to learn about a new equipment or a software that doesn't have in his university. And it's not a relationship of student-professor. It's a colleague with another colleague, exchanging ideas, creating new knowledge, and in the end maybe publishing something. My relationship with the two other short-term missions was the perspective, was to learn about my perspective about the problems in the world, and my perspective is that the world has the biggest problem, is that it's increasing very fast, the human population. About 100 million people are added every year in the world, and very soon we will be about 10 million people. Majority of those population is going to the cities. Now the cities have about 0.5% of the population of the world, but very soon this will be about 65% according to the projections in 20 years. Or maybe it will be like Belgium, 90% of the population will live in cities. And maybe this will create problems like in Hong Kong, one picture with very high density housing, or in Mexico City, the other picture, a sea of houses where there is no green space, and quality of life, I think, is very low. Another problem we have in the world is that the population is aging, and it's aging very fast. At this moment, 1/3 of the population are old, and very soon it will be half of the population old people. Our cities are not ready to have so high percentage of old people. They don't have sufficient number and well-distributed green public spaces and quality to accommodate the needs of old people that will be the future of the cities. And climate change probably is the biggest problem that we will have in the next century, and the cities will suffer the most with sea rise and flooding and dryness, because most of the cities are located in warm places and close to the water, close to the sea, or close to the river. The urban heat island effect is very well known, and we know that the more green spaces we have, the less of this heat island problem we will have. And the solution is green infrastructure, more green infrastructure and better distributed. Green infrastructure is having multiple benefits. Is protecting species, biodiversity, is providing habitat, also is giving us many ecosystem services like clean air, decrease of pollution, purifying water, and also recreational opportunities, and also jobs, business opportunities. Some solutions already start to be developed, like the vertical forest in Greenland and green roofs, green walls. But is it sustainable? Climate change is affecting mostly the poor neighborhoods, and there is no environmental justice if we build green buildings that are very expensive, if we build public green spaces that are very expensive, very only for the elite. The two STSMs visited some contrasting situations in Faro, where public spaces, very expensive, are used very few for very few people. Some of them built it only for the elite. And this is not sustainable. Green infrastructure as a reaction to climate change is not the first time that we see in the planet. In the past, 600 years before Christ, we had the Babylon hanging gardens as a response to climate change in Persia, Iraq, and it was beautiful, but doesn't exist anymore. When we build infrastructure only for the elite, it will not last. We have to have a perspective that environmental justice should be included. So I had two STSM, and it was produced 2 papers already accepted in the conference Urban Growth and Circular Economy. And I hope that they will finish before the deadline of 5 of April. The abstract is already accepted, and we will have 2 publications from our construction. Well, thank you for your attention. If you want to ask something, be a host doesn't have any reward. I don't win any money, but I win experience and collaboration. That has very few bureaucracy, just to sign a paper that it finished successfully the objectives of the STSM. It's something good, and I hope that there will be more volunteers in the next call to accept more STSM. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very positive outlook on the STSMs. Lisanne, you're up next. We've already met you once today, so maybe I will, for the purpose of time, let you just jump right into yours.
Thank you. So my STSM was about the use of life cycle assessment in the design process of refurbishment, or restorative heritage refurbishment. I will have to keep it very short because I'm being told we're running out of time, so I'll skip through it. So I will start by why I did an STSM, so really shortly about the topic of my PhD and the host institute that I visited. And then introduce you all to life cycle assessment a little bit more, because I'm afraid that if I dive into the results, you will not understand what I'm talking about. And then to discuss a little bit more about the focus of the STSM, which was to analyze the different life cycle assessment databases that are out there, the methods that are applied, and the different software packages that can be used. And finally, the conclusions, so the decisions that I made in setting up an approach for using LCA databases, methods, and software in my PhD project. So really quickly, my PhD is about post-war housing. So it's about these social housing estates that were built outside of urban areas in 1945 and 1965. And in our country, we are recognizing them as having heritage significance. My topic is about a big expansion of Amsterdam, which has been assigned to be one of the areas of this time period that is of most heritage significance in the country. And it has a lot of different styles of architecture of that time and different building systems. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to integrate heritage significance assessment, life cycle assessment, hydrothermal performance assessment, and life cycle costing in evaluating different design refurbishment strategies, basically, and refurbishment designs. But today I will focus on the life cycle assessment. But now you have an overview of different disciplines that are associated with the PhD. So I went to Bolzano, a beautiful city in the northern mountains of Italy, near the Dolomites, to Europe. I already met Alexandra Troy, who is the head of a chair of the Institute of Renewable Energy, and the chair is about historic buildings and energy retrofitting of them. And we had already tried to set up a networking relationship. She visited my university, we worked on some proposals together, and both our groups wanted to explore that networking possibility further. And actually, as both life cycle assessment in buildings, there are not many universities that have strong expertise in this field yet. In Netherlands, for example, there are some universities that specialize in LCA, but really on a product scale. And on a building scale, it's far more scattered, the knowledge and the expertise. But both URAC and my university really wanted to develop the knowledge. So we had a similar aim. So it was basically about knowledge exchange,
So me explaining to them what I've been doing, what I've been learning, and together trying to develop this further. So we're still working on this exchange, and I think it will last long after the STSM. So diving into it, this is the team that I've been working in. So we all know that a building goes through many life cycle stages. So you have to extract the materials, construct the building, use the building, maintain or refurbish the building, and then at the end either demolish it or recycle. While we mainly have been focusing on the use aspect and the use phase, as it has had a very high impact on the environmental carbon footprint and primary energy use. In newer buildings, as the energy efficiency is getting better, the embodied energy is actually having a higher impact, especially percentage-wise. So there is an increased focus on these other life cycle stages and how to also optimize those. So what does life cycle assessment do? Basically, throughout the entire cycle, it inventorizes or tries to list all of the materials and energy flows and that are happening as inputs in the process, and as outputs you have, of course, the products and the byproducts, but also emissions that are happening to water, to air, and waste products. So what life cycle assessment does is calculate all of those impacts, and then it translates it to different impact categories. So we all know global warming, and it's been discussed a lot today. So that's of course CO2 and other greenhouse gases that are calculated as an equivalent to CO2. But there are other threats to the environment. So acidification potential, for example, is the threatening our water sources and our it's an ozone depletion, abiotic depletion, etc. So there's many other categories in which other emissions may have a very high impact that we may be overlooking if we're only looking at carbon. So what these life cycle stages of the building are categorized according to European norms. On a whole building level, all of these life cycle stages are taken into account, but the last one, D, so the reuse and recycling, is still one that is very contentious. So there's a lot of discussion about how to take it into account. You don't have to take it into account, but you can, but there's not really one approach towards this last phase. But A to C are well developed. On a building, on a product scale, you have to take into account at least the first stages of the production of the product, and the other stages that are maintenance, repair, etc. You may also say something about that. So, for example, in a product LCA, we have environmental product declarations. So they are sort of a certificate of a product that says, for the building, if you apply product in a building, this is the impact that happened during the manufacturing of the product. So if you're talking about a wooden window frame, for example, here we are calculating the electricity that was used to cut down the tree, to process it, the transport of the truck to transport the wood, the electricity of the factory where it was made into a beautiful frame. And in the other stages we are also taking into account that you need to put coating on the frame every 5 years, for example, so this is a continuous impact that happens. So that was the basics. So as you all may understand, for a building it consists of very many products and it has a very long life cycle. So basically the starting point of a building LCA is easier to build on product LCAs and try to sort of make a big puzzle of your building of all the different products that are in there. But the process of an LCA on both scales is very similar, but it's difficult, so I'll try to make it very easy and show how these processes are working and what's important from a database and method perspective to keep in mind. So the first part is all of these, in every product there is an LCA, and in the final step of the building there is an LCA. Now the first ingredient for this LCA is the life cycle inventory. So the inventory step is where you inventorize the materials, the energy, and the pollution emissions that are coming out of that step. It's very important that this inventory is based on the same assumptions and the same background data is what they call it. So there's different background databases, and in Europe we have finally found a consensus on which one to use. So it's important that you use products that are based on the same background data, because you start mixing the background data, you start comparing apples and oranges basically. So also in the building there may be products where there is no EPD, or where there is a process happening on the site, for example. So you need to get an LCI background data to inventorize those processes. So they are separate databases, and EcoInvent is the one that is used in Europe at this moment the most and the biggest. The next step, sorry, so this is the process. The next step is you need to select life cycle impact assessment method. So there's many different calculation methods of translating these different emissions into impact categories. So one method may use a different calculation method to translate methane to global warming. And one may use human health, and the other may use toxicity of the air, for example. So also luckily we have recently agreed on one calculation method in Europe. But the ones in America or the US are very different. So it's also important to take into account that the EPD that you're using has this same calculation method, because otherwise you cannot use it in your LCA. So then naturally you get EPDs. These EPDs end up in an EPD database, which you then can use for your whole building analysis. So a few discussions about these different EPD databases. There are deviations. So you have generic EPD databases, which are basically you have this type of concrete, and it has this LCA. But you also have product-specific LCA databases. So that is a manufacturing saying, I made this concrete floor, and I used this type of electricity in my plant, and I use this process to make the floor, and I've calculated every single detail of this floor, and this is the output. So obviously the more specific one is more reliable, but sometimes you do not have the more specific ones, then you need to use the generic ones. So what are the main causes of deviations between the two, but also between different products? So the system boundary. So always keep in mind whether your EPD is only focusing on the construction phase or maintenance. Okay, I have to hurry up. What background data is used, whether there's a lack of detail, whether it's geographically representative, because for example, aluminium in Europe has very different recycled contents than in the US, and even within Europe there's a very big difference for different types of aluminium. So you have to try to pick an EPD that's as closest to your country as possible. And the allocation methods, but I cannot explain it now because it's very complex. So now a few details for certain materials. So as I said, for metals, recycled content is very important to check whether it's close to the product you're using. In concrete, the percentage of cement in the mix of concrete is very important, and also in reinforced concrete, the percentage of reinforcement of the rebar. And in foam glass, the energy used at the factory, because yes, if a factory uses renewable energy, the impact of the products also goes down, and in foam glass, the energy use is a very big part of the impact. Materials that have a high impact: concrete, steel, bricks, polyurethane, and gypsum. This was a review of standard buildings. And other than that, LCA is mostly conducted on exemplary new constructions, and not a lot on more generic buildings, and not a lot on refurbishment. So there is a big lack of data. And it's mostly used as a final result evaluation. There's not a lot of comparisons of design alternatives or comparisons between different types of buildings or solutions. So there's also a lack of a benchmark, which Catherine de Wolf has also been working on a lot to develop this benchmark. But it's hardly ever, it's only used to calculate the final result, but not a lot to support design decisions. But there are big leaps happening in aligning the different databases and methods in LCA. So the final steps, conclusions, is that LCA should be seen as an iterative process, so that you start with a screening LCA where you use generic LCA data that you can easily access, and you get more and more details throughout the process, and use more specific LCAs. To keep in mind when you select the software or the EPDs, so it has to be location specific, there needs to be a consistent method and a consistent background data. You have to find software that you can integrate in a design process through BIM or energy modeling, for example. Energy performance needs to be integrated as well, because I wanted to compare the life cycle of the building, and to have easy workflow. So I checked all of the software out there, and in short there are a few big players that are not specifically tailored to buildings, but they are very big. So Gabi and CIMA Pro, for example, they are used to evaluate products, but it's very difficult to model a building in such programs because they are not tailored to it. And then there's specific tools that are tailored to specific certification or to specific national building codes or countries. The problem with those is that they have a complete lack of transparency in the calculation and in the data. So you do have to select something, but you cannot see what's happening. They don't show you the entire calculation, and they are usually have a very limited database that they are focusing on. And they're also not really good in the integration with BIM or energy models. So I found only one tool that has almost all European databases, both generic and national databases. It's one-click LCA, and it's also integrated in BIM and energy models. And it's also certified for BREEAM, LEED, and other types of certifications. And it's according to the ISO standards, of course, and has all of these databases. It's very easy to use. They are still in a development stage, so at this point they are still discussing about academic licenses and those kind of things, so it's a bit hard to get one at the moment. But I think they will develop that in the future, but it's really good that there's finally a tool that has more databases, more access, and that is also able to link with energy models or BIM, Revit. So that's the tool that I'm going to be using in an iterative process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now it's time for our final presenter. Giulia Sonetti is a research assistant and sustainability manager at the Inter-University Department of Regional and Urban Studies and Planning at Politecnico di Torino and Università di Torino.
Thank you. I will be quick.
Please.
So the title of my presentation is a little bit different from the title you see on the agenda. This actually is the title of the paper we are preparing with Emanuele Naboni and Martin Brown, submitting it for the Sustainability Journal. So it's about exploring the potential of ICT tools for human-centric restorative design. I will skip the intro because you already know why we are talking about restorative design today. We already know about the ICT and the smart cities self-congratulatory tendency and how much there is a blind spot in the human factors, speaking about the sustainability evaluation of buildings. And I just want to show you this picture because I took it a few days ago. I work in the architectural and urban planning department in Turin. It's facing the Po River. And after I went to the KADK in Copenhagen, where we were speaking about how to measure the light comfort inside the building with the Arduino sensor, many things. I just came back to Turin, look out from my window, and I saw it was a bench, put just opposite, facing not the river but the opposite part. I don't know why. Another bench facing the river, but in a way that people were unable to watch other people playing cards, for instance. No? So the urban planner was so dull that he has two choices to mistake how to put the benches, and he mistook it twice. So sometimes we really forget about the human factor that is so much resilient that anyway people find a way to do what they want to do. No? They want to sit and face the river. They are uncomfortable here, but they do that. Or they are uncomfortable here, but they do that. So human factor is something we have to explore when design. And above all now, after the 30 years of the sustainability discourse, we have so many tools to do that. We have a social network, artificial intelligence. So this is my research question. Can technologies and artificial intelligence be used to create systems that make new relationships between buildings and mechanical systems and inhabitants through art, social networks, and natural interaction, supporting the research about the human-centric design tool? And here we come with the HOME project. HOME stands for, it's an acronym standing for Human Observation Meta-Environment. And this is a project that is carried on with the CIBEL grant. I'm the manager of the sustainability team of the Polytechnic di Torino, so I use the university campus rooms to test our appliances. And it is also in connection with the University of Turin. There is plenty of sociologists, anthropologists, philosophers with whom I study and research. And this is a very interdisciplinary project because we need everyone on board to explore the potentiality of these tools. And so far, we conducted two types of experiments. I will show you in a bit. So the first was can sound like this, like, "Hi, I'm classroom. Are you happy with this temperature?" Because now, actually, we are making the building speaking to the people inside. And there was a project by our partners in crime, that is this society called HER, Human Ecosystem Relazioni, that was named persona non data. So they were mapping the density use of the space in the Somerset House in London. And we thought that we could use these kind of patterns to understand how people behave in buildings, and more, how to observe and collect information about their feelings with the building. So we are launching campaign on social networks, try to ask people, how do you feel inside? And why do you feel like that? How are your emotions, your well-being, your affordances, your expectation for this building? Of course, we can put all this stuff in relation to energy consumption, but not only. So this was my blow-minding adventures with the cost action. So we have now to act in this paradigm shift from sustainability toward sustainable regenerative design and so forth. So the first thing is that one. The second is describe these strategies that can correlate the desired outcomes of not building occupants, but buildings inhabitants. That is quite different. And then create something that is interactive, sensorial, visual, to include these inhabitants and not occupants in their building management. So the preliminary result was that we described the IT architecture at the base of this project, and we created a working prototype, and we exposed it in Turin during the Art Week in form of an artistic installation. And we collected the first user feedbacks to proceed and go on with experiments. And then we are submitting a paper, hopefully, last but not least. So this is the IT architecture of the human ecosystem project. I won't go into details of that. there are 2 case studies. We are exploring these feelings, user feelings in 2 rooms, in 2 different places in Turin. One is a study room and another one is a lecture room. So data sources are, of course, smart meters, temperature, humidity, CO2 sensors, but also people's tweet and Instagram posts. These are the 2 buildings that we are observing. One is a castle from the 17th century and another one is the Norman Foster Campus Enaudi building. So this is also very interesting because you can understand, for instance, how beauty can affect the perception of comfort, for instance, inside the building. I won't go into the details of all the things we have to do to integrate all the data coming from all the sensors. Maybe this is worth explaining because you should, Emanuele showed it before. So we first harvest the word comfort in the semantic realm of the social network in Turin to understand if there was some correlation with something about restorative design. So actually there is design, but there is also style, fashion, home, food. So comfort is not only about temperature and humidity, but there's so much to explore about it. And also there's so much to explore about when people feel comfortable, in what time of the day and where, for instance. And which kind of emotion are connected with comfort. Satisfaction, happiness, pleasure, of course comfort, and at which time of the day they are expressed. And all these tools are available because Google is exploring ourselves and is using this data to make us desire a new product, to make an advertisement on our Facebook page. But we can use this data also to inform practitioners about what can be designed in order to meet the building's occupant inhabitants' expectations. So this was the prototype. It was actually a smart agent. We call it smart agent because it's like a brain, no? made by cameras that are the eyes of this brain, made by sensors that are our senses. But plus, I will show you what we are talking about. This was the first installation in the Valentino Castle, the castle of the 17th century you have seen before. And it was made by screens, and there was a voice pronouncing the algorithms that this smart agent was discovering by seeing for instance, this is the matrix of density use of the space. And it was quite interesting because in the walls there was some pictures on. So you can, for instance, understand where people stand more and why. And also there was this interdisciplinary workshop in which we try to ask to all these people from all different disciplinary backgrounds, what does it mean for them being in a sense in building? And it was very funny because we did it with storytelling, no? So we asked them to perform a story. After one day, they were the protagonists of a story in a future sentient building. And so there were a lot of concerns about privacy, you know. People maybe not often want to be in a sentient building so far. So it helped us to disseminate the activity, to understand which ways the building can interact. Maybe it's better Twitter or Instagram, or it's better even to raise an hand, because there is way to lower the temperature just raising an hand. You just train the algorithm to recognize when a hand is raising, for instance. But also the art exhibition was very nice because art created a translation platform. No? You were mentioning, Martin, when you say the first problem is about language. Because sustainability is a buzzword, but also smart city is buzzword. Maybe regenerative can be another smart buzzword. But if we are clear with what we mean, and if we shift the plane to, for instance, art, maybe we can be free to, I don't know, explore what does it mean for us. And these are the steps done so far. Now we are in the communication campaign to launch the hashtags. Of course, we have to be on the move for that. And we are going to test the pilot in these 2 rooms for the next 3 months and hopefully feed into the restorative sustainability research. Thanks.
Thank you very much for listening. Thank you to all the STSM participants and to the hosts as well. It's been very productive, and I hope that you will take the time to meet with the participants and the presenters and ask them more questions during the networking opportunities throughout the day. With that, we can move on to the next step. Andras, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.